If you have topics you would like to have us discuss on the Aging Well podcast, please click on the links in the episode description to send us a text or record your message or comments. We'd love to hear from you and how we can help you age well. If you benefit from the Aging Well podcast and would like to support the content financially, please click on the Support the Show link or support our affiliates and advertisers. Welcome to the Aging Well podcast. I'm Jeff Armstrong here with Corbin Bruton. In this and the episodes that follow, we will share candid discussions on aging and hear from the experts. We are here to inform and encourage as we experience, aging. In this episode, I'm joined by Hannah Wendt, co-founder of TruDiagnostic. TruDiagnostic offers advanced epigenetic testing. Their advanced epigenetic testing kits offer a deep dive into your biological age, influenced by your lifestyle and genetics, and provides a detailed analysis of various health metrics. It provides a comprehensive report grounded in cutting-edge research that offers personalized insights into how to optimize your health based on your unique epigenetic data. We discuss the results of my recent test and how testing can equip you with the knowledge to make personalized and optimized decisions unique to your health and goals for aging well. Hannah, welcome to the Aging Well podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Let's begin by having you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you became interested in epigenetics.
Yes, it's an interesting story. I remember growing up always being interested in science and how the body works. So I knew I wanted to go to school for something related to science, whether it be chemistry, biology, biochemistry. I was looking at med school, veterinary school. I just wanted to do it all. I loved school and loved learning and expanding my knowledge base. After I graduated from the University of Kentucky, though, I got a really interesting position right outside of Lexington at a compounding pharmacy. And this pharmacy was really interesting to me and was a pivotal point in my career because it was really when I was exposed to healthcare providers in the integrative functional medicine space. So these were healthcare providers who treat healthy people, usually on an all-cash pay basis, and not sick people, which is pretty profound if you're not familiar with that world. And at that compounding pharmacy, we offered a lot of unique, novel products such as peptides and other small molecules. And there isn't a lot of data on those products. People always feel better when they take them, but we wanted to prove to regulators, payers, that these products were more than just fancy ways to keep people healthy and optimize their health. So in the background, we were actually creating and looking at epigenetics as a way to measure aging. Aging being this number one risk factor for all-cause mortality, morbidity, which I'm sure we'll get into more. But it kind of happened spontaneously almost. It wasn't like we set out to discover epigenetics or dive a little bit deeper into epigenetics. We really just wanted to use it as a biomarker to prove that the products we were using were keeping us healthy from a quantitative standpoint.
So tell us then about TruDiagnostics.
Yeah, TruDiagnostic. We are a health data company located in Lexington, Kentucky. So we actually set out to really measure, understand, and interpret these epigenetic markers. So we have a full in-house lab in Lexington. We don't outsource to any other third parties. And we have a couple products, our flagship one, again, being testing biological aging, right? The age of your cells, how you're actually aging at a cellular level. We know that's super important because when you compare that to your chronological age, it can be very, very different. And I think a good example I always like to give people is, think about your age, how old you are according to your birth date. And then I'm sure you can think of many of your peers, colleagues, friends who are your same chronological age as well. But you may have some that look a lot older or that look a lot younger. And that's what we're really measuring. That's what we're capturing at TruDiagnostic is that difference that's happening on the biological level.
So who should consider the epigenetic test?
Yeah, this epigenetics test is really, I would say, for anyone who wants to be healthy and optimize their own health. So epigenetics is really a way to quantify your DNA regulation, which genes are turned on and which genes are turned off. I usually compare that to genetics, right? People are more familiar, seem to be more familiar with genetics at least. So I'll give another personal story of mine, and maybe you all can relate who are listening as well. But I have Alzheimer's in my family. My grandmother passed away from Alzheimer's when I was in high school. And I said, well, I want to know if I'm at risk for this disease. So I went and I got my genetics tested. I came back with a variant, an APO E34 variant, meaning I am 2 to 3 more times likely than people who do not have this variant to have Alzheimer's at some point in my life, and then to also have it diagnosed at a younger age. So that's my genetics. That's not actually ever going to change, which is sad, right? It's kind of disappointing. It's a little depressing. However, epigenetics is actually the modification of those genes, how we can turn those genes on and off with our environment and our behavior and our control. So epigenetics actually makes up about 80% of our entire well-being, essentially, where that genetics only makes up about 20%. So I know that with the tools I have in my own hands through nutrition, exercise, stress, sleep optimization, and there are many others as well, I can actually epigenetically reduce my risk for Alzheimer's. So it's no longer you're no longer tied to your predisposition from your family members, right? We can't blame them anymore, is the news I'm saying. We're now in full control, which is a little scary, but just as empowering too.
Yeah, I find epigenetics fascinating, especially as we dive into this podcast more and more. And, I first kind of got introduced to epigenetics through David Epstein's book, The Sports Gene. It's actually not even the chapter that's in the book, it's the chapter that was kind of left out. But, when you realize that, like I teach my students in my exercise physiology classes, that there's this physiologist, Per Olaf Astrand, that once said, if you want to be an elite athlete, choose your parents wisely. And, so we talk about genetics and all that kind of stuff, but really you start looking at, when you get into epigenetics, to a certain extent, you're also looking at your grandparents and, previous generations and the impact that they have on your current genetics. But then also, as I've gotten into this more and, looking and having taken the TruDiagnostic test, we have control over our epigenetics. So it's really a fascinating field that I think is just starting to open up. And I think it's an exciting opportunity to have you on the show today and to talk to our listeners about epigenetics and how, we can follow many of the principles that we talk about on the Aging Well podcast and be able to track that and see, how is it working for me? How am I modifying the risk factors that maybe have been passed on to me? So I can't blame my parents. I have to take a little bit more responsibility for my own health. And so I'm really excited to kind of dive into this a little bit further.
Yeah, me too. Me too, Jeff. And it's, you're doing all of your students a huge favor by teaching them about this phenomenon. Well, it's not a phenomenon, it's real, but by teaching them about this layer in our biology. I don't ever remember learning about it in high school, not even really college. Maybe the difference between like nature versus nurture in a paragraph or two in my biology book, but that was about the extent of it. So I really did grow up and was taught growing up thinking, hey, if your family has Alzheimer's, coming back to my grandmother's example, you will end up with that disease and you will die from Alzheimer's, which again is pretty scary, pretty stressful, and not doing anything good for your health by coming back to that thought. So I think really empowering people, as I mentioned, and letting them understand that really what you do on a day-to-day basis outside of those previous 4 factors I just mentioned, but even things like alcohol consumption, smoking status, your toxicity levels surrounding your environment, even your insulin sensitivity, your weight status, all of that is really going to be associated with how your genes are being expressed, or again, your epigenetics. So we see this trend a lot in social media right now. It's everywhere on the news, sayings like, you are what you eat, or your DNA is not your destiny, or food is medicine, which it makes me giggle every time I see those, because they're indirectly talking about epigenetics without stating it, right? So I'm excited about, your knowledge base and what you're really teaching your students.
Yeah, I teach a pathophysiology and exercise class, and I tell my students we could basically pare down a lot of how we can prevent many of these diseases simply to 5 things, and we've added a sixth to it recently from one of our other podcast interviews. But we talk about exercise and physical activity, talk about maintaining a healthy body composition, eating a healthy diet, getting good sleep hygiene, and not smoking. And then we've recently added, having good social connectedness.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of those things can have a huge effect on how our genes are turning on and turning off, and we can take better control over our health.
Yeah, definitely. And environment plays a really big role. And maybe I'll give even a further definition or a little bit more insight into what we do at TruDiagnostic, because it's aligning with what we're saying. Essentially, you take your sample, right? We sent you a kit, Jeff. You pricked your finger. It was a blood spot card. When you send that sample back to our lab, we're looking at 1 million of those on and off switches, those epigenetic markers. And what we're able to tell you based on that is really limited only to our imagination and the size of the actual data set itself. So we can tell you, again, how much you've smoked across your entire lifetime, how much alcohol you've consumed. We can even tell you down to the zip code where you live based on these on and off switches, talking about the environment, right? And who you surround yourself with, not only like physically the environment, but your people, your friends, your purpose as well, your relationship with self. So it's really like this fingerprint of your body. You're taking your fingerprint of everything you've been exposed to, and then that fingerprint is going to be associated or predictive of other outcomes. And that can really be extrapolated to any disease, right? I know this is the Aging Well podcast. We're talking about aging, but epigenetics can actually create a fingerprint for any other outcome. So one example I like to use for this, it's a pretty extreme example, but it's one that we're actively working on at TruDiagnostic, so I like to use it. With our partners at Cornell, we're looking at people who have neurosyphilis. So this is syphilis, but in the brain, it passes through the blood-brain barrier, and it is very invasive to diagnose this, and it's very costly. So you have to go into the clinic. It'll cost you about $10,000, $20,000 out of pocket, and they give you a lumbar spine puncture. Very uncomfortable, right? They're puncturing your spine. They're trying to get to that cerebral spinal fluid. And what we're doing is we're looking at people who have neurosyphilis and their epigenetic markers, their fingerprint of neurosyphilis, compared to controls who do not have neurosyphilis and what their epigenetic fingerprint looks like. So now, with just a couple drops of blood, maybe 10 to 15 drops of blood on that blood spot card, we can really look at that fingerprint pattern for neurosyphilis and say, all right, you have X% chance of being exposed to this outcome, or, hey, you're good. We don't have to put you through further testing. So it's really, really interesting when you start to get into the other applications as well outside of aging. So I like to use that one.
And this isn't something that's necessarily a one-off test either, right? Because since we can change our epigenetics, we might want to look at multiple tests over time to see how we are managing these risk factors. Is that correct?
Absolutely. I'm so glad that you brought that up. So the first test is important. You have to take a test to get started. The second, third, fourth, fifth, on and on test, those are by far the most important tests. Just like your blood-based panel, your complete blood count, just like your hormone panel, if you're testing your hormones, if you're testing your hormones and you're deficient in testosterone, let's say, you're not going to act you're not going to not act on that and then not retest, right? So if you get an age back that you're not happy with, or you want to push the limits a little bit further and you're not aging well, hey, we want to make a change and then we want to retest. Probably, I would say on average is like somewhere between 6 to 12 months. You could do it as soon as every 2 to 3 months if you really wanted to, though.
Well, let's kind of dive into it because I recently received a report from my TruDiagnostics Epigenetics test, and I think it might be interesting to kind of discuss my results with the listener. I will share. I don't have anything really to hide in my epigenetics, so I don't feel too bad about kind of talking about all aspects of what's in my report. But first, what can a listener expect to find in their report? I discussed my epigenetics test with TruDiagnostic co-founder Hannah Wendt in episode 162. Epigenetic testing measures baseline and changes in your pace of aging, giving you the power to steer your anti-aging or health and wellness journey in the right direction. I learned that I am aging well. Click on the affiliate link in the episode description, use the promo code AGEWELL, and receive a 12% discount on your epigenetics test and monitor your pace of aging.
Yes, that's a great question. So you take the TruDiagnostic test. Well, maybe one, why are you taking it and what can you expect? Well, we're taking this again because I can't stress enough that aging is the biggest risk factor for all-cause mortality and morbidity. If you think of the top 3 causes of death in 2020 in the US, you have heart disease, cancer, and COVID-19. We think of things like sex, male versus female, hypertension, alcohol consumption, smoking as biggest risk factors. I'm telling you, aging trumps all of those risk factors. I mean, it's just way up there. There's some really cool data and graphs on that as well. So what we provide you surrounds that idea and aligns with what you can expect, which is about 4 different outcomes that tells you how you're aging. So aging is very complex. It's multifactorial. I wish it were easier and we could just give you an age and it was the end all be all. But we actually run a couple of these, what we call biological age clocks. So they take a chunk of the epigenetic markers and they're trained and validated to predict a specific outcome, right? We're aging differently in our body in other ways. So we can go through those on your report, Jeff, and I can talk about each of those ones individually and what they're really made for and what the purpose of each of those is.
Well, let's dive in.
Awesome. So I'll start at the beginning, I think with maybe the most important one, and they're listed in order of importance on our report as well on this summary report. So first and foremost, we have a clock or algorithm, again, called Omic M-Age. Now, this Omic M-Age is called that because it used different layers of the multiome to create the algorithm. So to create this algorithm, we actually measured layers of the epigenome, those on and off switches, of your metabolomics, of your proteomics, and of clinical lab values as well. So this is a very high-powered biological age clock, and it is the best predictor for death, actually. So if you wanted to look at your risk for overall death, this would be the one that you really would want to focus on. It was a clock that we created with Harvard, and it was actually published in October of last year, too. So, Jeff, drum roll, you clock in at 55.87. So, your Omic M-Age is 5.14 years lower than your calendar age or chronological age. This is really impressive. It's not easy to get your biological age lower than your chronological age, especially this Omic M-Age one. It tends to be a little tricky to really have this lower. And this is more of what I also call a historical based biological age clock. So it's capturing everything that's happened across your entire lifetime up until now. So
That's kind of scary.
Yeah, right. Think back to your childhood days, right? And any type of traumatic events, which we're all human. We've all been through traumatic events in our life that can definitely affect aging. Even some things that are way out of your control, where you were born, right? How you were raised. It all really accumulates in this number. And what this shows to me is you've been taking care of yourself. And not just now, but historically and for quite some time too.
Well, that's good to know. I'm sure it's good for my listeners to know because kind of be bad if I was doing this podcast about aging well and my biological age was, 65 instead of 61.
Exactly. Now, what's even more impressive is, hey, all right, you're younger, but what does that mean, right? What does that actually mean? And that means that you are at lower risk for all-cause mortality and morbidity, for death in almost every single chronic disease there is. And we do report some of these out on the report. So your risk of death, cancer, heart disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes, COPD, and depression is all lower compared to people of your same chronological age. So really, really great work, Jeff. The last thing I want to point out here is you are in the 35th percentile. That means you are doing better than about 65% of the TruDiagnostic population. So you want to be in a lower percentile. This is really good. The reason that's impressive and that I bring it up is because we have a very healthy cohort, right? We have, you're being compared here to about 20,000 people in the TruDiagnostic cohort that are optimizers, right? Paying cash pay healthcare providers, a lot of money every month, every 6 months, every year or so to be a patient of theirs. So it's pretty competitive.
But there's room for improvement.
Always room for improvement. Always room. I love this. I'm just going to claim the title. I think I've done more report reviews than anyone in at TruDiagnostic, at least. I think, anyone in the world as it relates to biological age test, maybe even. But I get these people who I say, okay, you're, I would say 7 to 10 years younger is probably like the cap you can get, or that I've actually seen. But even those people are like, oh, I'm very upset with my score. I want to do better. And I can just tell, the type of person they are and their personality, which is great. We can always do better.
All right. So what do we look at next?
All right. The next thing we are going to dive into, Jeff, this is actually one of my favorites to talk about. This is the Dunedin pace of aging. So that Dunedin pace of aging, it's a funky name. It's actually a city in New Zealand, Dunedin, New Zealand, where this study was created. So I'm going to give some background about this one because it's my favorite to talk about, and it's just a really cool study. So what they did in 1972 and 1973, Jeff, is they took about between 1,000 and 1,100 New Zealanders from Dunedin, and they measured them across their entire lifetime longitudinally. They're about 53 today. They're still measuring this group, and they have about a 96% retention rate, which is insane.
That is insane.
Any good retention rate in the US is like maybe 50 if you're lucky, right? So it's a very unique cohort. I think it is the only of its kind. I've never seen any like it. And it's going to be really, really hard to replicate just because of how long the study has actually been going on. Now, what's really interesting is across these people's lifetime, they've actually measured blood-based biomarkers, physical function test, cognition test, even dental records, eye scans, facial scans. I mean, they're doing full body workups on these users and have done about 5 of those workups across their lifetime. So what they're able to create from all of this data collection is not necessarily a biological age like we traditionally just went over or think about, but it's a pace of aging. So it's a speedometer, right? You have the turtle on the left-hand side. You have the rabbit on the right-hand side. It's the only time you actually want to be the turtle. You want to be aging slower. And you, Jeff, are at 0.85. So by definition, one sentence definition, that means you're aging 0.85 biological years for every 1 chronological year. So that's awesome. Right? That is actually more of a representation of the past 3 to 6 months rather than a whole historical based aging. So not only do you have really good historical based aging, you're actually actively working on even further pushing that biological age down too.
Yeah, that's kind of cool. And I didn't realize it was just over the last, would you say 3 months?
Yeah, like 3 to 6 month running average, essentially. Yeah, and you're doing really well according to our population as well. That same healthy TruDiagnostic cohort, you're below the average trend line, which is really great because what happens is as we get older chronologically, we do see this number kind of steadily creep up over time. So we're, actively trying to work against it as we're aging. Now you have a really good score. This scale for those listening goes from 0.6 to 1.4, if you can imagine that. So, if you're at 1, you're aging 1 biological year for every 1 chronological year. And I would say the goal is obviously as low as possible, but usually around zero point 0.7 to 0.75 is where we set the goal. Because if you think about it in quarters, if you keep it there for 3 years and it's steady, you're going to erase or chop off a biological year on the omic MH essentially. So we want to keep it steady there. And this is the smaller kit we offer at TruDiagnostic, where it's just the pace of aging in another report. People test this one more frequently, like every 2 to 3 months. So you look good. Number one recommendation for actually slowing this down, it may or may not come as a surprise, is going to be caloric restriction. So just a 10% overall caloric restriction in healthy non-obese adults over a 2-year period. It's called the Calorie Randomized Control Trial, and that was published in Nature about a year and a half ago in February of 2023. So a really interesting study to show we can actually slow this down as well through a simple lifestyle change or caloric restriction.
Yeah, and we'll come back to that because I know one of the things that interests me in this is that in one of the reports, I come back as resistant to a hypocaloric diet.
Yeah.
So I need to reduce my calories, but I also need to be probably boosting my physical activity even more to get rid of some of my body fat. My activity level has dropped a little bit over the last year. I got really, really active during COVID because I had plenty of time. I didn't have my commute and I just could manage things a lot better and there wasn't much else to do. But I'm trying to kind of find more time for some of that activity.
Yeah. Well, we can talk about that one. I think that's if you want to, that's a good one to just stay on if we're on this topic.
Sure. We can jump to that one.
So,
where do we want to go to look at that one?
Yeah. So that one is near the end of the report. But I like that you brought this up. This tells me that you really, really read your report and you were thinking about it. So this just means, Jeff, you would not lose weight with caloric restriction, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we still recommend caloric restriction for longevity, increasing lifespan and health span purposes, and to reduce that pace of aging number. You just wouldn't lose weight from it because of your epigenetic expressions and the way you're having certain genes turned on and turned off. If you wanted to lose weight, we'd recommend a complete dietary change or complete physical fitness change, like you mentioned as well. Cutting out things like sugar. You could try carbohydrates, alcohol, switch between aerobic, anaerobic based exercises, get some yoga in there, breathing exercises, meditation, more calming of the mind too. So yeah, you interpreted that exactly right. And it's not necessarily good or bad if someone comes back as non-responder versus intermediate versus full responder. It depends on you and what your goals really are. Usually, subjectively, people who come back as non-responders don't have weight to lose necessarily. That's the trend that we see subjectively. That probably has to do with something in terms of their metabolism, right? Or some homeostatic set point level that they're already at as well.
Great. So where do we go next?
All right.
This is a big report.
I'm going to go back up. To the aging outcomes. The one I want to talk about now is telomere length. Jeff, are you familiar? Have you ever had your telomeres tested before?
This is the first time.
Okay. Gotcha. So telomeres, some of your audience may be more familiar with this one. This is just historically one that has been researched a lot and was previously the gold standard, I would say, for measuring aging. It is not our favorite. It's our least favorite outcome on the report, I would say, and I'll tell you why. It just doesn't predict outcomes, really, right? The entire point of this testing is, hey, let's predict outcomes so we can effectively measure it, make a change, and retest. It's just very, very poorly related to outcomes. There's a large hereditary component to it as well. So you're going to get it from your dad, your parental side. However, doesn't mean they're not important or they can't inform us about something. And Jeff, you come back at having a telomere length of 7.1 kilobases. That actually puts you at a telomere length biological age of 51.11. So you're looking really good there. Now, I wouldn't focus too much, though, even on both of those metrics. For the telomere length report, I really like to look at the percentile. So, what does that mean? What does the 7.1 kilobases mean? Well, it actually means you're doing better than about 80% of our population. You're in the 80th percentile. You want to be in a higher percentile here. You want longer telomeres. And let me define telomeres too. Telomeres are going to be the ends or the caps of your chromosomes. They're going to protect our DNA. You can think of them almost as a shoelace. Over time, when you have an old pair of sneakers and they're worn out, they're beat up, your shoelaces start to fray at the end. That's what happens to our telomeres as we age. They start to unravel, they start to fray, we start to get dysfunction in our body. So we still want healthy telomeres, but they're just not as good of a predictor as we once thought they were. But you're doing great here as well. You have a good telomere length.
That's always nice to know.
Yes. Yeah. So that's a good one. That can be associated too with oxidative stress and inflammation. So if anyone's not looking as good there, if they're in like the 20th percentile or lower, we traditionally like to recommend, some antioxidants, or something like fisetin, quercetin, resveratrol, tyrostobine, curcumin, turmeric, sulforaphane, broccoli extract. You can get a lot of that through dietary input, but you may want to supplement with some of that as well.
Great. So where to next?
Let's look at your physical fitness age. This one will be fun. And you look pretty good on this one too. It's harder to do report reviews with people who look really good because there's, I can give you, feedback to keep pushing and make these markers look even better. But when the report looks really bad, I can say, all right, you need to do X, Y, and Z, right? And then we'll retest. But you're looking really good on all fronts so far, Jeff. So this physical fitness age, here we're getting more into these like fun characteristic and trait-based reports. We don't want to treat this as like a primary outcome. It's not going to be predictive of death and disease like the OMIC M ages in the first one we went over. However, you are younger here. Your physical fitness age is 55.34. So you're even younger than your overall OMIC M age by 5.67 years from your calendar age. Okay. Now, the OMIC M age, the larger age at the beginning of the report, is incorporated in this physical fitness age. So I was hoping you'd already be lower because your aging is already lower. Since you're even lower than your OMIC M age, though, it does mean that your physical fitness components are doing really well. And by physical fitness components, I mean, if you scroll down a little bit further, we actually can quantify your grip strength, your gait speed, your VO2 max, and your FEV1. And people are probably wondering like, oh, well, how do you do that? That's so interesting. Remember, we're measuring a fingerprint. It all comes back to that fingerprint. So in order to create these clocks or these outputs, these algorithms, we actually took people's VO2 max, FEV1, grip strength, and gait speed at the same time we took their epigenetics test. And then we could create a pattern or a fingerprint to report out that biomarker. This is actually what we call an EBP, or epigenetic biomarker proxy. It's a term that we coined here at TruDiagnostic, where, again, epigenetics is the input, and then we have something else as the output. So, Jeff, your grip strength, you're in the 95th percentile. Your gait speed, you're in the 81st percentile. Your VO2 max, you're in the 67th percentile. And your FEV1, you're in the 70th percentile. You're doing great. Now, if I had to be super picky, I know you mentioned, hey, you're not working out as much as you were during COVID. I would say if you are going to get back into it, let's maybe put a little bit more emphasis on the aerobic-based exercise training. So think more of your endurance, right? You're biking, hiking, long distance, you're jogging. Swimming is really good, right? Swimmers have a really good FEV1 for their lung capacity and their oxygen uptake. So, and I'm only saying that because your percentiles are just lower than anaerobic ones, the grip strength, the gait speed, more of the oxygenated type of workouts like lifting and sprinting.
And that does match my habits. I do focus much more on the strength just because, I want to maintain a little bit better strength, because I know if I don't maintain the strength, I can't maintain the VO2 max and all that. But I've put less emphasis in doing the cardio, and I haven't run in years, but I do kind of get on the treadmill and I walk more, but I'm not doing the things that would really push my VO2 max up.
And that's not uncommon, right? Whenever I tell anyone that, I usually get, I know, right? Like I know I need to be running or trying to get my VO2 max up, but you do have to do what you love, right? Any workout's going to be better than no workout, even if you are just going for a walk outside. So, maybe incorporating that 1 or 2 days a week, like you mentioned. We need to also lift weights a minimum of 3 times a week, like moderate weights, and make sure that we're not losing muscle mass, especially as we age too, because we know that that's going to be associated with aging over time.
Now, I'm curious, kind of over the individuals that you have examined their reports, what has tended to be the trend, particularly with the older population? Do you see maybe cardio being a little bit more emphasized than strength, or what do you see?
Yeah, just in terms of what people are doing. Yeah, I would say, usually people who are aging well are pretty well-rounded, right? They're doing a little bit of everything. So they are doing the strength probably 3 to 4 days a week, but they are also focusing on rest and recovery, right? And maybe those days it is more of like a lighter jog, or it is not super intense like hip sprints. I mean, that can be thrown in there as well, but it's a lighter jog, it's a walk outside, it's the stretching, it's the yoga, it's the flexibility. All of that plays a big role. So people who are aging the best are definitely going to be more well-rounded and not necessarily focused on one or the other.
Because we talk a fair amount on the podcast about historically, as an exercise physiologist, we've been pushing cardio far more than strength. And, my feeling is that when we ignore the strength, we do tend to diminish our capacity to do the cardio. And so both tend to kind of trail off over time. And so, we're trying to push a little bit of both, but obviously you got to push a little bit more of that cardio for myself.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think when it comes down to it, as long as you like what you're doing, you're getting in the gym anyways, right? That's half the battle. But if you can work in a little bit more of that cardio, and it can change. It could be you could sit down and do the bike and get just make sure your heart rate's getting up. You could jog. I think a really easy way that I found for my heart rate to get up and for it to be quick and as painless as possible is, doing the stair stepper. I'll do the stair stepper for 10 minutes or until I hit 500 steps. That usually, takes 10 minutes. Sometimes I can get it in 7 or 8, depends on how fast I'm feeling I want to go, but I'll make sure my heart rate's getting up there 120, 140 and staying pretty steady.
I work out at home, so we have a home gym, and we had for years a really nice stair stepper, and it just finally died on us a few years ago. So,
oh no,
back to having just a stationary bike, and we have a treadmill. And I don't care for the treadmill as much. I always loved the stair stepper just because I could get a much more intense workout in a relatively short period of time. So,
yeah, they're nice.
Yeah, I miss that. So that's good. I'm aging fairly well here, so that's good.
Yes, you're aging well. It's really well rounded, and again, one of the biggest questions that we get is, okay, well, what next, right? We really covered everything on your report that you have. So what next? Well, everything that we've already been talking about. I really like to focus on the lifestyle factors with people first, as simple and silly as it may sound. They by far make the biggest difference in between change in the case studies that we've seen at TruDiagnostic. So it really is diving into your nutrition habits, right? Are you intermittent fasting, time restricted feeding? Is there room for caloric restriction? Is your diet pretty well rounded too? Same with, stress, same with sleep. Are we, measuring sleep? How many hours of deep sleep are you getting? How many wake events do you have? Are you turning off screens before bedtime? Are you tracking that with Aura or Whoop Ring? And then lastly, as we've been recently talking about, is the physical fitness aspect.
Great. So where do you want to go from there? I have been tracking a lot more. We had guest on recently who talked about monitoring heart rate and heart rate variability. And so I've got my Garmin watch and I've been tracking that. And sleep has been interesting because I've had really, really great nights of sleep. And then like last night was a horrible night's sleep. And I don't know, part of it is I think we watched television a little bit later last night, and that could be part of it, but really beginning to track many of these different events that I'm doing in my life and what is having the most positive effect on, my sleep patterns and my heart rate variability, and trying to modify those to kind of tune in things a little bit more effectively.
Yeah. Yeah. I think too, right. And the same goes for our testing. You can't manage what you're not measuring. So you may wake
Right.
up and say, oh, I got a bad night's sleep. And that's still subjective, right? Even though you may have gotten a bad night's sleep. So you having that Garmin watch and actually being able to say, oh wow, like I know I didn't sleep well this past night. Let me try X, Y, and Z to change this. And then wake up the next morning and you can look at your watch again and say, oh, well, now I'm sleeping a little bit better, right? How can I keep monitoring that, or how can I keep changing that to really optimize my overall sleep? So that's why I mentioned earlier too, the first test, we need to get you tested, we need to get you in, but it's the trial and error that matters afterwards. It's the N of one precision based testing that you're doing on yourself afterwards to really understand your body and how you're aging. That way we can, live longer and live not only longer lives, but live healthier at the end of our lives too.
Okay, so what else should we be looking at in this report? I'm looking on my screen right now. I have the smoking and disease risk, where it talks about your DNA methylation. I can't get that word out this morning. My score was 97%. I'm assuming that's good because I don't smoke, and I try and avoid being around smokers as much as possible, which I think is important.
Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah, of course. So this is, and you said it right. You got it out. The methylation, which is just the specific marker we're looking at. You want this marker, this AHRR gene, shut off or more methylated. When something's methylated, it means that gene is turned off and less expressed. So we know that that tobacco has a huge impact, and even the smoke exposure level on the epigenome and how your genes are being regulated. So this one marker in particular, out of the million that we measure, is predictive of really your smoking risk. It's more accurate than even your self-reported smoking status. So you're exactly right. You want this gene shut off. You want a higher number here. So you mentioned you're at the 97% out of 100. So we're saying, hey, you have a status or a phenotype of a non-smoker. This puts you at a lower risk for developing smoking-related conditions.
So what else? What's the next thing to look at? I see on the page here, I have extrinsic and intrinsic age.
Yeah, so the intrinsic and the extrinsic epigenetic age, these are older age algorithms. We'll actually be phasing these off of our report in the next week, actually, hopefully, fingers crossed. So these are algorithms that we offered at the beginning of TruDiagnostic about 4 years ago, and we're the best at that current time point. But now we have omic MAge that really beats these algorithms in terms of the accuracy, predictiveness related to outcomes, changing with interventions that absolutely have a beneficial effect on our aging. So these ones don't perform as well. So usually they're not a huge discussion topic in how we educate our users.
Because I kind of like the extrinsic epigenetic age. I think
Right.
I think it says about 39, just under 40 years of age. I kind of like that one, but
yeah,
can we keep that
people,
one on just for me?
Most people do. Yeah, that and I'll define that one even for you so you can understand it more and your listeners too. This extrinsic age, again, it's another age of the body that really is measuring more of how your immune cells are affecting your whole body aging. So it's synonymous with immune age, right? That the age of your immune system. And most people look way, way younger there. But we know it's, not quite measuring a whole body system like the omic MAge is.
Let's kind of jump to my next question, which is how does epigenetic testing play into the future of healthcare and more specifically preventative healthcare?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. Epigenetic testing really represents a transformative approach in the field of healthcare. It offers so many insights outside of aging that are influenced by many different factors. And it really facilitates personalized medicine at its finest by early disease detection and targeted prevention strategies. I think that's massive, right? As the research in this field progresses, really integrating this epigenetic testing into routine healthcare practices is likely to enhance disease prevention, improve treatment outcomes, and just promote overall well-being. So I think this is huge. This is not only going to transform laboratory testing, but the entire medical field as we see it. I really do think we'll start to see epigenetic testing integrated in, general practitioner offices one day.
Yeah, it seems to me it should be kind of a priority thing done on your annual physical, your annual wellness test. It's like do that once a year and you get your report. You can see how people are progressing over time, how these interventions are working, and maybe we can get away from drug prescription a little bit more and start looking more at behavioral changes and how that's going to impact health, and hopefully get the whole population aging well.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I think we're fingers crossed, not too far away from it, and not too far away from making the tests cheaper, more accessible by everyone, and also getting them reimbursed by insurance. I think eventually at one point too. So it's not just the goal of having this put into medical practices to be there, but just making it more accessible too, and really just helping patients at the end of the day.
And maybe you mentioned kind of insurance. Maybe we should talk a little bit about kind of dismissing any fears that people might have, because I know there's a lot of paranoia when you get genetic testing, how it's going to be used and how it might negatively impact you. Can you just kind of dispel some of those myths? Because from what I'm seeing in my report, I have no fear of sharing any of that information with anybody. And granted, I've had a pretty positive report, but it can maybe scare some people that, hey, if my insurance company gets a hold of my report, they might see that my chronological age is higher than it should be and might give me higher rates.
Yeah, definitely. That's not something TruDiagnostic is touching or doing. We're, a privately held company. We own our own lab. All of your data is stored and secured here. We're not sharing that. No one that we don't know is working with your sample. So we are very, clear and communicative about that in the privacy policies and our SOC 2 compliance and our CLIA and CAP lab certifications, meaning we, check all the boxes in terms of regulatory rules and following the highest of standards in a laboratory setting. But it's absolutely a concern, right? When choosing who to test with, or, choosing if you want to do this test, there is always a risk that some companies may not have your best interest at heart. So it's, definitely recommended to reach out to them, ask what their privacy policies look like, where your sample's being sent to, if they actually own that own lab. So I think we'll see companies come out in the future, and there are already a couple that focus on epigenetics as it relates to insurance premiums.
All right. Well, my next question is one we ask of all our guests. And I think you've kind of touched on a little bit of this yourself, but what are you personally doing to age well?
Yes, I am doing a couple things to age well. I am, really focusing on those lifestyle factors that we talked about. And I am specifically focusing on caloric restriction. So I switch, from more high calorie or micronutrient foods to better profiles. So really good example of that is for breakfast. I love to eat breakfast, right? And I eat eggs, high protein, sausage, bacon, and switch from traditional meat to turkey meat. And as silly as that sounds, that's way better profile of food first off, but it's also going to be way less calories. So I really do focus on caloric restriction. I think that'll be huge, and it's more consistent. I'm lifting weights. I'm trying to work in more of that HIIT, going on walks, and focusing on being in green space more too, especially it being so nice here in Lexington in the summer. And the last one I'll give you from a lifestyle standpoint as well is going to be meditation. So I just got certified in transcendental meditation. and I've been meditating at least once a day. Protocol is supposed to be 2 times a day. I'm working on ramping up there to twice a day. From more of a supplement medication standpoint, I supplement with things I'm deficient in from my blood-based values, and take hormones that I'm deficient in as well. So I see my functional healthcare provider and get, laboratory tests through them every 6 months, which is going to help optimize your aging too.
And this is a question we can edit out if you don't want, or not answer if you don't want to answer. But you talked about having the epigenetic marker for Alzheimer's. Have you kind of tracked that over time? Are the behaviors that you're doing having a positive effect on those markers, or do you know that?
For my epigenetic test?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So stress is huge. I'm just like I have like run on high energy, love to, always be moving around. And I've learned to definitely, take a step back and relax a little bit more. And, one of the reasons why I chose to do the transcendental meditation. So I've seen significant changes between my pace of aging metrics when I'm meditating more versus not. Also when I'm traveling less as well. So I just got back from Italy, being in London twice over a 2-week period, right? Traveling can, and the time change in the circadian rhythm can really throw off the aging cycle too.
All right. Well, this has been a fascinating and informative discussion. Is there anything else you want to add that maybe we've missed to talk about?
No, not necessarily. This has been awesome, Jeff. Yeah, for those of you who are interested in testing, I'm happy to answer any and all questions and talk with you. I think, Jeff will be able to give you a discount on the kit or a link to the kits, hopefully, if you're interested in testing, and we can go from there and review results with you once you have them available.
That's great. And is there a web page or social media that they can use to kind of connect with TruDiagnostic and with you?
Absolutely. Yeah. Feel free to reach out to TruDiagnostic.com, TRU, and diagnostic is singular. I have my own personal podcast and website as well called Everything Epigenetics, as a way to keep educating those on epigenetics and the paradigm shift it's causing in traditional medicine.
I'll have to tune into that one because I am fascinated about the epigenetics.
Yeah, it's a good one. You'll enjoy it, I think.
Well, Hannah, thank you for joining us. And obviously we want you to keep aging well.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jeff. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for listening. I hope you benefited from today's podcast. And until next time, keep aging well.